We have 220,000 men and women in prison in Texas. Around 70,000 men and women released from prison every year in Texas, and another 70,000 men and women go back into prison every year. So the numbers are really high. Huntsville, you could have 15 to 20,000 men released through the Walls unit. Just a few blocks from Sam Houston. 15,000 men or women coming out of the prison there. When the men and women are released from prison, we don't want them just handed a bag of stuff they need. We want them to feel like someone saw them individually and cared about them. We want them, I mean, they feel like the world's forgotten about them. Imagine walking out of prison, 2/3 of the men that walk out of the Walls unit, there's no one there to meet them. Their families aren't there. They imagine walking out, no one's there, that caving, lonely, hopeless feeling. And so we want not just to hand them something, line up and get something. We want someone to look them in the eye, say, hey, you're seen, and we care about you. Every plan and decision you've made in prison is tested that minute you hit the daylight.
I walk up to them and I just introduce myself, ask them their name, and look them right in the eye, and let them know that they're cared for. The last thing they hear when they get out is, we'll see you again, right? That's not our attitude. I get it. They're not in there because they did something good. I've been a victim of crime, but they deserve a chance.
7 more, it's actually a biblical reference, and it refers to this great story about Jesus being asked how many times he should forgive, a man should forgive, because in that culture they believed there was a number, you'd put a number on it 7 times and you had done your due diligence. And so he said, hey, it's actually 70 times 7. And his point wasn't count to 490. His point was that we're not counting. You shouldn't be counting people's offenses or their mistakes.
I talked on a kids ministry last year, and I was talking about fear. And then after we prayed in small groups, and I asked the kids, what's like your fear? And it was this girl. She said, people say that I will end up in prison like my mom.
Do we keep in touch with any of them after? We do. We actually have a wristband that we give them that has a phone number and a website so that they can contact us. It's hard for us to contact them, so we try to encourage them to use that phone number for resources, but also just if they need somebody to talk to, if they need somebody to pray with or to encourage them, then they call us, and then once we kind of establish more of a point of connection, then we can kind of touch base with them more if we know what halfway house they're staying at, or get a contact number for them. We do keep in contact as much as they're open to contacting us.
I went out here and there's a free phone. They got pizza, water, and you can see the love in their eyes telling you, hey, here, I want to give you this bracelet until you call a number for resources. I mean, with people like that, I mean, why couldn't you make it?
We have a separate phone, separate line just for this. And we help many of these guys. They have all kind of problems, all kind of questions. We'll pray for them if that's just what they want, or help them connect somewhere. We're like a bridge to the next place that will help them. And she has contacts of all over Texas, churches and companies and halfway houses and ministries that can help. And we just try to put them together. We get a lot of calls.
They're good people. They showed me that there is people that love you out there. You know what I'm saying? And they offered me something to eat, some water to drink. I love that.
And so we want not just to hand them something, line up and get something. We want someone to look them in the eye, say, hey, you're seen, and we care about you, and we believe in you. And so our biggest need is to have enough people out there.
And I'm already done, so I'm ready to go back to my house.
7 more isn't a number, it's actually a mindset that we're not looking at a person's past, but we're looking at their potential and what they were made for in their future.
When the guys get on the bus in Huntsville, they make their way to Houston on the Greyhound bus down I-45, and then we meet them when they arrive in Houston. It's scary for them. There are drug dealers, there's pimps, there's honestly most of the things that they were involved in before they went into prison are pretty much available to them in Houston. And so there's a large homeless community in that area as well. And so we really want to give them an opportunity to walk straight past their path. And we give them food, and then of course the all-important phone calls. So the phone call again in Houston is really important, because sometimes when they've gotten to Houston, they think that they're going to San Antonio, but actually their ticket says Austin, or they think somebody's going to pick them up in Houston and there's nobody there. And sometimes when they make that phone call, it can be quite distressing. They thought maybe a girlfriend or a wife or a child was waiting for them, and then they realize actually that person has moved on with their lives. One of the ex-offenders who was released, he was so excited to see his family. He had been gone for, I think, about 3.5 years, and he had a son who was just around 3 years old, and so he hadn't had any real interaction with that son. And then he had other children who were coming too, who were excited to see him. And the children were so excited, actually a little nervous. The children were a little nervous to be with him. And he was like a really lovely example of a good situation, somebody going home, but you can still see how nervous he was, and of course how difficult it is to reintroduce himself to the children. And he has this 3-year-old who has no clue who he is. And so we love to be an encouragement in that moment, a support in that moment. And it's nice for the children to see that there are people who affirm him, and he's not this stranger kind of crazy guy, and it was like a moment of celebration.
They told us that there would be someone out there. They told us that there would be a church out there that would help us with some resources. But once we got out there and they were so friendly, it was really overwhelming, you know, because you meet people from churches all the time, but they're not as, you know, I don't know the proper word to use, but they're not. So they were more embracing, you know. It made you feel like you were somebody, not just somebody getting out of prison, but a person, you know what I mean, an actual person.
So we came to Houston in 2005 from Dublin in Ireland, where we grew up, where our families are, and we had no idea how long we would be here. And when we moved here, we were helping to volunteer with a ministry that works with homeless people downtown in Houston.
And my wife found this little bundle in the corner of a parking lot. Thought it was a little puppy that had been abandoned, and it turned out to be a little 2-month-old boy.
He was covered in mold, actual mold, from not being changed, and then he had scabies, little fleas all over his skin, and he was raw, very raw, red, and he was just in a very hard situation. Physically just in bad shape, close to death, just because of the neglect.
Turns out it was, the product of, second, third generation cycles of homelessness and poverty in Houston.
The biological mom had been feeding him once a day for 3 months. So he was 3 months old and he was a very tiny weight. And she genuinely believed that she should only feed him once a day. She wasn't a cruel person. She just had also grown up in a very difficult situation. And so on that night, we just practically helped, and then found out she came back and talked with her, and she didn't want us to hold the baby because she said holding babies spoils them, which kind of explains the mold and the scabies. He also had this muscle in his neck had shortened, and this one had become longer because she didn't pick him up. The muscles had tightened.
The process of seeing that little bundle that literally smelled like death and neglect. Seeing that become just this healthy, vibrant, full of joy little boy who's now our son. Seeing that process has propelled us into this burning desire to see those cycles of poverty broken in the city.
You know, sometimes we can get a little bit caught up with what did they do? Why did they spend that much time in prison? Or, you know, what are they really like? And I really believe that when we meet them at the bus station, we see honestly what they're really like. What they're really like is not the person who stole. It's not the person who murdered or who did something awful. What they're really like is the core of who they are. And they are created in God's image, and they are loved, and maybe life has thrown at them things that have taken them off course and broken them, literally broken them, and we see them and we want to see them for who they really are and offer them a hope and a future.
If I could say one thing to a volunteer, it'd be, hey, come hear one story and you're going to become addicted to working with 7 more, because you just start to realize that, hey, the only difference between me and this guy who just got out is probably one of 2 things. One might be I had a dad, he didn't. And the other thing might be I had a different zip code, and with that zip code came some opportunities that this guy didn't have. And I'm reminded every day that my success in life has nothing to do with me, but every good thing I have in my life has been given to me, and I can't take credit for it. So, and you realize that every day when you're met with men who haven't been given the chances you have, you start to realize how much you've been given. So.